And I suppose this brings us to our first topic, which is you've just come back, if I understand correctly, from a trip to the Azores. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Azores stand right there on the mid-Atlantic ridge, yeah?
Exactly, Graham.
There's got to be a catastrophic story underlying this. So please tell me all about your trip and all about the Azores. Tell us all about it and why you were there and why you feel the Azores matter.
I guess I could say that they matter because after a detailed reading of multiple translations of Plato's two dialogues, the relevant dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, and having some knowledge of the geology, particularly marine geology, and a geography that Plato very explicitly describes of all the possible candidates that have been proposed for the locus of the Atlantean civilization. The one that seems to fit the details, Plato's very precise details and specific descriptions the most, in my mind, is the area of the Azores, which are 9 islands almost in the mid-Atlantic, sitting astride the mid-Atlantic ridge at what's called a triple plate junction, where you have actually 3 of the tectonic plates meeting. On the west, you have the North American plate. On the northeast, you have the Eurasian plate. And on the southeast, you have the African, now called the Nubian plate. Mm-hmm. And it's a very volatile region. It also has a lot of the earmarks of having undergone catastrophic subsidence in the very recent geological past. For that reason, after combing through Plato's writings repeatedly, and putting together the pieces, trying to connect the dots, it seems to me that is the prime location for what Plato is describing.
Tell us where Plato placed Atlantis in his mind's eye in the Timaeus and Critias. Where does he put Atlantis?
This power came forth from the Atlantic Ocean. He describes it being outside, west of the Pillars of Hercules. Not south, not north, not east, but west.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've pointed out is that in the 60s and the 70s, it was declared by the geological establishment that any possibility of Atlantis being in the mid-Atlantic region was completely impossible because of what we knew about plate tectonics and continental drift and so on. And yet, when you actually go back through the research that was as early as the 1940s, you find out that there is an abundance of evidence that is consistent with Plato's description, and consistent with the idea that there was a massive subsidence in that exact region. And now I was interested in there because I've fantasized about the Azores being part of what is called the Azores or Azores microcontinent, which shows up very clearly on bathymetric charts, on digital elevation models of the Atlantic Ocean, and its approximate size fits very closely to Plato's description. The topography fits very close to Plato's description, and the location fits. His description of geography is very consistent. Beyond the west of the Pillars of Heracles or Hercules, you encounter islands, and then beyond those is the island complex of Atlantis, and then beyond that, as he describes it, is the true continent.
Which we have to read as the Americas.
Exactly. I mean, and if you do that, if you read that as the Americas, then his whole geography becomes totally consistent. Yeah. And the 9 islands of the Azores have their roots in the microcontinent, as it's called, and there's essentially mountains, just very much like the Hawaiian Islands are mountains, mm-hmm. whose peaks are above sea level. Likewise with the 9 islands of the Azores. And I only visited 4 of them. Mm-hmm. And essentially what I was looking for was anything in terms of consistency or inconsistency with Plato's account. And I found nothing to be inconsistent with that possibility. We had a professional geologist traveling with us, and he admitted, yes, there is evidence here that would be more consistent with continental bedrock than oceanic bedrock, mm-hmm. which I found very interesting and supportive. But it was mostly just to take in the geology, take in the natural conditions of these islands, and just get a sense of my own direct experience. Mm-hmm. And what I found, I'll say, like, for example, São Miguel, first island we visited, was basically paradise, but then you look at the other islands, and there's definitely evidence that's consistent with catastrophic episodes in the recent geological past.
The kind of catastrophic episodes that you're hinting at here, if I'm correct, the well-known 400-foot, 120-meter sea level rise that followed the end of the Ice Age is not enough to expose the Azores as an above-water massive landmass.
No, it is not. It would certainly increase the size of the islands.
Yeah.
But it would not give you a landmass almost on the scale of, let's say, Iceland. Another factor is involved, and that factor is what we call isostasy. It's the vertical movement of the Earth's crusts. Yeah. And there's been extensive research done on that, which, in my mind, bears directly on the issue of Atlantis. Now, I've got to admit that, yeah, there have been some pretty wild assertions that that sort of accreted onto Plato's very specific accounts. And one of the things I like to point out is that I kind of look at there's two dimensions to what Plato describes. One, the geology and the geography, which is primarily represented in Timaeus. Then he discusses the the city, the ringed city, the infrastructure, which is primarily descriptive in Critias. You can accept the geological and geographic explanation without necessarily accepting this vast ringed infrastructure, right? Now, the argument is always between, the academics will say, well, he just meant it as an expression, a metaphor for his political ideals of his, his perfect civilization, his perfect society. And it was nothing more than a metaphor. Then you may have another school of thought that goes a little further than that and says, well, there might have been some historic reality behind it that he drew from. The prime contender, as you well know, would be the destruction of, say, Crete because of the eruption of Terra, which happened about 900 years prior to Plato's time. And so if you have the academic community willing to accept any kind of historical veracity at all to Plato's accounts, that seems to be the prime contender, although it doesn't fit the narrative at all. And including
they want it to be recent.
Yes.
They don't want it to be old, even though Plato was very clear. Tell us a little bit more about isostasy, because that is really important. The way I view isostasy is a kind of seesaw with weight on one end of the seesaw pushing the other end up, and then when the weight comes off the other end, it has the opposite effect. Tell us how the Azores fit into that picture.
Okay, so let's go back to 1948, the first traverse over the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. A research vessel, interestingly called the Atlantis. But it was organized by Maurice Ewing, who was one of the founding fathers of marine geology and oceanography. And this is what he said, and I've got this in my presentations and in the book that I'm writing about this. I quote this: all hands were tense as the word spread through the little research vessel, Atlantis, for it meant we had reached our goal. A mile or so beneath our keels stretched the gloom-shrouded peaks, valleys, and ridges of the longest mountain system on Earth, the mysterious Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which we had come to explore. Though our ship was named Atlantis, we had no illusions of solving that age-old mystery. They traversed the ridge. They took up some cores and dredge samples, and what they found was very surprising. For example, they pulled up a core that contained sand, as you would find at a beach, yet this is over a mile below the surface of the ocean.
Right.
And he goes on, he describes here, the sand contains the remains of bottom-dwelling creatures living today in present oceans, but confined to much shallower and colder water. What they're getting into is they're finding this evidence over and over again of things that look like they're much deeper than they're supposed to be. Like here's some of the things we found in the second cruise, which was a year later, 1949, create new scientific puzzles. One was the discovery of prehistoric beach sand in 2 core samples of the bottom, brought up in one case from a depth of 2, and in the other nearly 3.5 miles. Wow. Far from any place where beaches exist today. So this is already being found anomalous evidence in the 1940s. And he goes on to say, and this is quoting Maurice Ewing here, sometime in the distant past, this sand found deep beneath the ocean must have been located on a beach at or near the surface of the sea.
Yeah. There you go.
And he says that the conclusion that the land must have sunk 2 to 3 miles, he calls that startling. It's startling. And then we have from 54, the ocean floor. This was a study by Hans Petersen, who was a Swedish geologist, marine geologist, and this was like a follow-up expedition. And he's talking here at a depth of 4,400 meters. The core sampler brought up a core nearly 9 meters long, the uppermost parts of which consisted of fairly homogeneous, fine-grained, deep-sea clay. But in the lower part, several layers of sand were found, which mineralogical examination showed to be not mafic, which is oceanic basalt, but of continental origin. That is derived from a coastal shelf of some continent or large island. Most surprising of all, in the lowest stratum of this sand were found vegetable remains, twigs, nuts, and bark fragments of dicotyledonous bushes or trees, bespeaking still more emphatically a continental or island origin. Finally, in the uppermost parts of the same core, Flieger and his co-workers found a displaced fauna consisting of benthotic, which is bottom-dwelling, shallow water foram shells, which apparently had lived in depths of about 100 meters. This is 2 miles below. One is at a loss to explain how these products of a coastal shelf and submarine vegetation could have been carried to the position. The nearest part of the coast of South America is the Amazon estuary, which is situated far away. In the event that a large island harboring vegetation and with a fairly extensive shelf crowned the mid-Atlantic ridge and became submerged during a catastrophe of seismic volcanic character. So right there, this is going back now to the 1950s or 40s, 50s. They're looking at this evidence that suggests something happened, that this is much lower in the sea bottom than should. And then we have coming forward to, again, that same year, 1954, again, Maurice Ewing, and he's talking about the Atlantis cruiser and great meteor seamounts rise from a broad ridge or plateau, which extends from the mid-Atlantic ridge at 37 degrees north, 32 degrees west. The Atlantis seamount, briefly explored in 1947 and 1948, was found by echo sounding and submarine photography to have a fairly flat bedrock summit area at about 180 fathoms, covered in some cases by cobbles and in other by current rippled sand. Its slopes are covered with sand or ooze symmetrically rippled at 400 fathoms and marked by slump features at 570 fathoms. About a ton of flat pteropod limestone cobbles was dredged from the summit area. One of the cobbles gave an apparent radiocarbon age of 12,000 years.
Oh, that's fascinating. So 12,000 years, that puts us back into the Younger Dryas time frame.
Yes. And let me finish the quote.
Yeah.
The state of lithification of the limestone suggests that it may have been lithified under subaerial conditions in the atmosphere, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that the seamount may have been an island within the past 12,000 years.
And this is in a mainstream source.
This is mainstream source, yes.
Going back to the 1950s when there were mainstream scientists who still had open minds.
Yeah, 1954. The cruiser and great meteor seamount studied in 1952 have larger, flatter summits at 150 and 165 fathoms depths. These youthful geos may have originated as volcanoes, which were later capped by limestone, and more recently have sunk beneath the sea. Getting back to your question about isostasy.
Which is how this stuff sinks beneath the sea, really. If sea level rise isn't enough, is isostasy the mechanism that drives it beneath the sea? And if so, can you visualize that for us? Can you envisage what that might have meant if you were on the mid-Atlantic ridge at a time of an isostatic collapse?
Right. So here, I was just showing some of the empirical data consistent with subsidence. Now, this is from 1969, tectonic implications of glacio-eustatic sea level fluctuations. It appeared in Earth and Planetary Science letters by a team. Now, eustatic is the rise and fall of sea level commensurate with the expansion and contraction of glaciers on land. Glaciers melt, you have eustatic rise. Eustatic rise and fall of sea level is directly related to isostatic differentiation of the bottom of the ocean bottom. This is what was published in 1969, Tectonic Implications of Glacio-Eustatic Sea Level Fluctuations. The possible tectonic implications of glacio-eustatic sea level fluctuations have only received minor attention in connection with such problems as ocean floor spreading. The purpose of this report is to point out that late Pleistocene sea level data suggest that the ocean basins have responded isostatically and by a significant amount to the loading and unloading of water associated with Pleistocene glaciation. If you've got this major rise of sea level, you have to have a compensatory downward movement of the sea bottom.
But also there's the other side of the equation, which is the ice mass being lifted off North America.
Yes.
Which then you have isostatic rebound at the opposite end of that seesaw would be pretty much the mid-Atlantic ridge.
Yes. These are some images aerial images taken years ago of the area around Hudson Bay. Hudson Bay was the center of the great North American ice mass. Okay, so these are elevated and abandoned shorelines along Hudson Bay. The highest one is about 1,500 feet above present sea level. And so this is a rebound now of continental granitic bedrock. This is the core of the North American continent, and it was where the thickest part of the Laurentide ice sheet was, at about 1.5 miles thick. In this photograph, here's Hudson Bay out here, and what you'll see is that as you come forward, you're going back in time. The largest displacements occurred immediately after the deglaciation. So in other words, the early stages of rebound were much faster than later on.
To put this in simplistic terms, when we talk about rebound, what we're saying is that landmass was pressed down by the massive weight of the ice. And then as the ice came off, as it turned into water and went back into the world ocean, the land began to rebound upwards.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the point is in geophysics, the geoid of the Earth is always trying to move towards equilibrium.
Yeah.
So if one place is rising, somewhere else needs to be going down. And that depression is going to not necessarily be uniform. It's going to be focused along the zones of least resistance. This is from the professional journal Quaternary Research. The title of the article is Late Quaternary, Glacio, and Hydroisostasy on a Layered Earth. So hydro meaning isostasy driven by movements in ocean volume. Hydroisostasy, the concept that meltwater from Pleistocene ice caps produced loadings of ocean floors such that significant global deformation followed, recently has been examined by Walcott. The earlier qualitative assessments of hydroisostasy as an important factor in glacioeustasy are qualitatively supported by Walcott, who also demonstrated that the effects of glacioeustatic inundation will vary with location. Obviously, one of those variants are going to be focused along areas of least resistance, and clearly one of those would be along a triple plate junction.
In the role of simplifying this, we're to envisage a North America where the landmass is pushed down by the weight of ice, and a mid-Atlantic ridge which is pushed up to the opposite end of the seesaw. And then when the reverse happens, the mid-Atlantic ridge subsides catastrophically beneath the sea. And this, coupled with sea level rise, results in the loss of a kind of Atlantis-sized landmass.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's it. And that's a good analogy, a seesaw type effect. And so were we to enter another ice age and 400 feet of sea level, which is hundreds of billions of trillions of tons of water, just think of a beach ball and you press it this way, it expands this way, right? Yeah.
Now, one of the intriguing aspects of Plato, which of course causes a great deal of controversy, is the statement he passes down to us that the submergence of Atlantis happened 9,000 years before Solon's visit to the temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta. That's drawing from the quoted words of the Egyptian priest, which coincides 9,000 years before Solon is 9,600 BC, which coincides perfectly with meltwater pulse 1b, which Plato could not possibly have known about, and nevertheless he gives us a date.
Exactly, and when you put the geophysics, bring the geophysics into it, like we've just been talking about here, clearly it is the rapid melting of the ice sheets, not only North American, but also the North European. You know, the whole Fennoscandian ice sheets were huge in their own right, much bigger than what now mantles Greenland. The timing suggests that the catastrophic melting of both sheets happened in a series of huge pulses of meltwater. The final pulse of that meltwater pulse 1b, just purely coincidentally, is dated 11,600 years ago. Like Plato told us that 2,300 years ago.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. And the final subsidence of Atlantis followed that rapid pulse of sea level rise.
In fact, there really were, in my view, two cataclysms: the beginning of the Younger Dryas and the end of the Younger Dryas.
Yes. I even speculate there was a preliminary catastrophe associated with meltwater pulse 1a that could have happened about 14.6.
If there was a lost civilization, that earlier event would have been what alerted them, would have been what woke them up to the danger that was coming, that would have made them pay attention to all of this and to be in some state of preparedness when the real cataclysms of the Younger Dryas took place.
Yes. That's pretty much the same framework that I'm looking at it. But Plato actually describes he says, there have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water. And then, of course, as you well know, he goes on to describe and invoke the story of Phaeton. That once upon a time, Phaeton, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, was not able to drive them in the path of his father, and he burned up all that was upon the earth and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now, here's, to me, the most interesting line. Now, this has the form of a myth, but it really signifies a decline of the bodies moving around the earth and in the heavens, and a great conflagration of all things upon the earth. Science itself is confirming the veracity of the ancient traditions. He's opening the story of Atlantis by invoking the myth of Phaeton. And then he says, well,
cosmic cataclysm.
And then he's saying, well, it has the form of a myth, but here's what it really signifies. I mean, it's pretty clear cut, I think, what Plato's doing there.
I think so too. And I think that he felt at liberty to incorporate elements of myth and tradition within his own philosophy, where it was useful to do that. And in that way, his philosophy serves as a time capsule that has carried down precious memories from the deep past, that if we are willing to open our minds and consider them, can completely reframe our picture of the origins of civilization.